Hello, everyone. My name is Sylvia Spencer, and I'm currently completing my bachelor's degree in psychedelics at the California Institute of Integral Studies. As a part of my senior project, I had the opportunity to explore a question that has been meaningful to me both personally and professionally. And today, I'd like to share what I discovered. My project is titled Embodied Inquiry, an autoethnographic exploration of intentional psilocybin microdosing and emotional regulation. When people hear the word psychedelics, they often imagine dramatic journeys and profound mystical experiences. Those experiences are important, but I found myself becoming more curious about something much quieter. I began wondering whether healing could also happen in the ordinary moments. Could small intentional doses of psilocybin, paired with thoughtful preparation and integration, slowly change the way someone relates to their emotions, their body, and ultimately themselves? That question became the foundation of this project. Like many people entering this field, I had read the research surrounding high dose psychedelic therapy. But I noticed that many people were also reporting meaningful changes through intentional microdosing. While the scientific evidence remains mixed, there seemed to be an important piece of the story that wasn't always being captured through symptom scales and quantitative measures alone. So I wanted to understand what those changes actually felt like. Not whether they happened, but how they unfolded. To explore that question, I chose an autoethnographic research design. Autoethnography combines personal experience with scholarly research. Instead of studying other participants, I became both the researcher and the participant. My lived experience became the primary source of data, while remaining grounded in existing literature and analyzed through a systematic research process. Over approximately 2 years, I intentionally documented my experiences through personal journals, emotional tracking, somatic observations, integration reflections, and reconstructed timelines. Rather than searching for one extraordinary experience, I wanted to understand patterns that developed over time. After collecting the data, I analyzed it using Braun and Clark's thematic analysis process. I immersed myself in the journals multiple times, generated initial codes, searched for reoccurring themes, reviewed those themes across the narratives, refined them, and then interpreted the findings alongside existing psychedelic research. Throughout the process, I remained aware that this was one person's experience, my own, and that my goal wasn't to prove effectiveness or make broad claims. Instead, I hope to better understand how emotional regulation was experienced through intentional microdosing when paired with structured preparation and integration. As I analyzed the journals, I realized something that surprised me. The moments that stayed with me weren't necessarily the biggest moments. They were often the quiet ones. One journal entry centered around unexpectedly being triggered while watching a Netflix show called Ginny and Georgia. The experience brought me back to the pain of the day my mom left my childhood home. Rather than pushing those emotions away, I noticed an increased capacity to remain present with them. Another narrative described an emotional release while driving. Instead of immediately trying to analyze what was happening, I simply allowed myself to feel it. Looking back, that experience reflected a growing trust in my emotional process. Another journal focused on anxiety that's resurfaced late at night. Rather than fighting those feelings, I practiced breathing, grounding, and reminding myself that I was safe. The anxiety gradually shifted from something I feared into something I could gently be with. One of the most meaningful entries explored learning to receive care from others. I realized that healing wasn't only about becoming more resilient or more independent. It also involved allowing myself to be supported, something that had been difficult because of earlier life experiences. Finally, one narrative, I called it On the Mat, described a movement practice where I recognized that my body was holding emotions my mind hadn't fully processed. Through movement and breath, I experienced a profound sense of grounding, safety, and connection. These stories became the heart of my research. Across those narratives, 7 themes consistently emerged. The first was emotional regulation. Rather than eliminating difficult emotions, I became more capable of staying present with them without immediately trying to escape or suppress them. The second theme was embodied presence. Again and again, my body seemed to recognize emotional truth before my mind could fully explain it. The third theme was self-compassion. Over time, I noticed a gradual shift away from self-criticism toward a greater kindness, patience, and acceptance. The fourth was relational healing. As I continued integrating these experiences, I noticed changes in how I communicated, trusted others, and allowed myself to receive care. The fifth theme was meaning making. The experiences themselves were important, but what truly transformed them into lasting growth was the reflection that followed through journaling, meditation, prayer, movement, and intentional integration. The sixth theme was increased self-awareness. I became more able to recognize emotional patterns while they were happening instead of only seeing them in hindsight. And finally, the seventh theme was intuition and inner wisdom. I found myself becoming less dependent on external validation and more willing to trust my own inner knowing. What struck me most was that these themes weren't separate findings. They all worked together. Each one strengthened the others, creating a more resilient relationship with myself over time. Perhaps the biggest insight from this project was recognizing that healing wasn't created by microdosing alone. Microdosing was only one piece of a much larger process. Preparation created intention. Integration transformed experiences into lasting change. Embodiment helped me recognize emotions as they arose. Reflection gave those experiences meaning. And healing unfolded slowly through ordinary life. One assumption I carried into this project was that journey level healing primarily occurred through larger psychedelic experiences. While this study certainly doesn't suggest that microdosing produces the same experience as a full dose journey, it did challenge that assumption. Within these narratives, I found meaningful emotional processing, increased self-awareness, autobiographical reflection, embodied insight, and lasting psychological growth. It left me wondering whether, for some individuals, intentional microdosing combined with structured preparation and integration may facilitate forms of healing that we often associate only with higher doses. I believe that's an important question for future research. Of course, this project also has limitations. Because this is an autoethnography, these findings cannot be generalized to everyone. My experiences are uniquely my own. This study also cannot determine whether the changes I experienced resulted specifically from microdosing or from the combination of intentional practices that accompanied it. That distinction is important. Rather than viewing that as a weakness, I see it as an invitation for future research. I'd love to see larger qualitative studies, mixed method research, long-term exploration of integration, and more diverse participant populations. The more perspectives we can include, the more complete our understanding becomes. As I reflect on this project, I keep returning to one simple realization. Healing rarely happens all at once. More often, it unfolds through small moments of awareness, through choosing to stay with difficult emotions instead of running from them, through learning to trust our bodies, through allowing ourselves to receive care, and through returning again and again to practices that help us reconnect with ourselves. This project didn't leave me with all the answers, but it did leave me with a deeper appreciation for the role that intention, preparation, integration, and embodiment may play in emotional healing. My hope is that this work contributes one small piece to the growing conversation around psychedelic research by reminding us that lived experience has something valuable to offer alongside clinical and quantitative research. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you for joining me as I shared what I discovered. Goodbye.